Alright, another Rings of Power video. I've been making a few of these videos lately. It's mostly been talking about articles from Entertainment Weekly or commenting on trailers they've been releasing. But in this video here, instead I'm going to be talking about some of the things that cast members have been saying in interviews, some questions that quote-unquote Lord of the Rings fans have been asking at conventions, and I got a few snippets from interviews that I'm going to play for you. Some of them are from a couple years ago before Season 1 was about to come out, and as I play them one by one, you might notice a bit of a common theme. So let's start here with Sophia Nambet, who played Disa, the dwarf.
Tell me a little bit more about Princess Disa and the fact that you are the first black woman to be a dwarf in Tolkien and the first woman to be a dwarf in Tolkien. Well, what do we learn about women dwarves that we didn't know through your portrayal?
Well, we learned that they exist.
I read there.
And thank you so much, Angelique, for noticing and acknowledging the fact that this is the first time that we see a woman and the first time that we see a black woman in this area and this world and these works of Tolkien. You know, this is necessary. This is a revolutionary moment for cinematic and television.
She's the first ever woman dwarf, which, no, there were female dwarfs in the Hobbit movies. And secondly, she's the first ever black woman, and this is historic. This is revolutionary. The first ever black woman in the history of Lord of the Rings movies or television, of which there's a total of, 6 movies out?
A loose introduction to the films many moons ago. Little did I know that they were seeds that were planted. But of course, suddenly I find myself in New Zealand playing the first female dwarf and...
Yeah, you're noticing a little theme here. I'm the first ever female dwarf. This is historic. I've made history. I've started a revolution, things like that.
It's time for so many people who may have not seen themselves staring right back at them on a screen to have that chance and to have that turn. It is our time and it's our turn.
There will no longer be a time where you can say there are no elves of color. So we erased that one.
This represents progression. This represents an acknowledgement of where we have been and a will to get to where we need to be. And this will be the visual reference that people, the younger generations will follow. And
female characters of color, there's a big conversation happening. I would like to have that conversation with him. I do think he would give a resounding F yeah.
Now Cruz Cordova, he's saying that he thinks Tolkien would support injecting diversity into Rings of Power. And this is a video I'm probably going to do at some point, because there are some letters that suggest no, Tolkien would not support diversity quotas. But that'll be for another video.
A lot of respect for it, and I felt very represented spiritually and intellectually, but not in image. You know, there was no one that looked like me.
You know, we're choosing to tell it in these times, so we should represent it for these times.
There are so many diverse people out there, but now they get to see themselves staring back at them, to be part of a redress of balance within this world.
Yeah, folks, there's a lot of quotes from the cast. I'm not going to play all of them, but you notice a common theme that it's entirely about identity politics, it's entirely about diversity and inclusion and representation. And the position I've given on this before is, look, Lord of the Rings, it's based on European mythology, it's based on European folklore. It was meant to be very English. Tolkien was trying to make a mythology for his home country of England. And because it's based on European folklore, the context there is that the people in there, they're going to be European in appearance. Just like if you made a story based on African folklore, the people would be African in appearance. If you made a story based on Indian folklore, logically, if you ask me, the people in there would be Indian in appearance, and so on and so forth. Nobody has a problem with diversity or inclusion or representation or whatever other buzzword that you want to throw in there. Nobody has a problem with any of that stuff by itself. But there are some stories out there where it does not make sense to have diversity quotas, and Lord of the Rings is one of them because it's based on European folklore. Which means logically the people in there, they're going to be European in appearance, or in other words, it's going to be a bunch of white people. But anyway, a common thing that you're hearing from the cast members is, I'm the first ever elf of color, I'm the first ever black female dwarf. This is all historic and it's revolutionary and it's a redress of balance and stuff like that. People can finally see themselves on screen. Lord of the Rings is finally accessible to everyone, even though it's been translated into every language and it sells all over the world. In other words, it's always been accessible to everyone. But to these cast members, it's not about Lord of the Rings, it's not about respecting Tolkien, it's about them. It's about their egos, it's about their personal identity.
Representative, because we're getting more diversity within this series. We're seeing our first black elf, we're seeing the first female dwarf.
We're introduced to the first black elf
We're introduced to the first female dwarf. Now, diversity, especially on screen as an actor, means a lot to me because growing up, I hardly had that. You know, watching TV and watching a lot of films and stuff, never saw people of my colour. So it's exciting to see that, you know, diversity is being explored in the Rings of Power.
I'm very excited for it because Tolkien's work was always about being inclusive. I mean, we see it through the Fellowship, like a bunch of people from different backgrounds coming together in order to face a common enemy, being Sauron, and just seeing the casting decisions. It's really, really exciting to see. It's just going to mean so much to like me personally because it's getting that representation in Middle-earth. Young kids are going to see that on screen, and it's just going to be really nice for them to be like, oh hey, there's someone that looks just like me.
In the original film series, which I absolutely adored, but there are not many women in it, and the three women who are in it never speak to one another. I don't really. So it will be so cool to be able to see more female representation, to maybe see them actually interact with one another.
It just makes me so excited for the next generation because, like, as you said, like growing up, like I was still excited about being an elf or a hobbit and joining in with it, even though I wasn't represented, like even like my disability or my queerness wasn't represented. It just makes me so happy, it makes my heart warm.
These were apparently Tolkien super fans, folks. Or in other words, they were fake fans that Amazon marched out there to try and convince everyone that Rings of Power was going to be great because these Tolkien super fans said so. I mean, this interview they gave was probably the most embarrassing thing I'd ever seen. I mean, they clearly demonstrated they don't know a damn thing about Tolkien. They were just repeating whatever lines Amazon gave them. But again, you hear more of the same thing. It's great to finally see myself on screen. It's great that this is representative. Things like that. It's not about Lord of the Rings. It's not about Tolkien. It's about them. It's about their own personal identity. And it's about seeing themselves on screen. That's it. We had this article from The Hollywood Reporter 2 years ago. Rings of Power star Nazanin Boniadi channels Iranian activism in her character. These brave women inspire me to play this role. What does your Iranian activism have to do with Lord of the Rings? You are being cast in the greatest fantasy world ever created, and in, you could say, the greatest story ever written. This is not about you.
Can you give me a little bit of hope? As we're all fan fiction writers in the room. I think there is hope. What could we say? Say it. Yeah, I think we will.
And this was much more recent, from almost a month or so ago at, what was it, San Diego Comic-Con? By the way, folks, Galadriel never had a romantic relationship with Sauron. And here's another question from San Diego Comic-Con from a so-called fan. Let's see what he had to ask.
So many of us in the LGBT community see ourselves in Tolkien's writings. Any chance we'll see ourselves on the show?
Maybe you have already.
You notice a common theme here. It's not about Lord of the Rings, whether it be the people asking these questions, and make no mistake, these people are not fans, but whether it be the people asking these questions or the showrunners or the cast members answering. It's not about Lord of the Rings, it's not about Tolkien, it's not about respecting Tolkien's work. It's all about identity politics. It's all about these individuals, their personal identities, and it's about seeing themselves on screen. That's the first priority of all these people. I mean, folks, identity politics, it is very, very deeply rooted in narcissism. Cruz Cordova, he gave an interview with Entertainment Weekly almost a month ago, where he's talking about how he's the first non-white elf. I love the nerve that I pinched. And he even admits his character is not a real Lord of the Rings character. And I did a video on this article. Cruz Cordova, he basically argued that Tolkien was woke, or he essentially insinuated that, and then shortly after, he said that it is necessary to revise and represent and exist, or in other words, it's necessary to revise Lord of the Rings for the sake of checking off diversity boxes. And again, Lord of the Rings, it is based on European mythology. So the context of that is, yeah, the people in there, logically, they are going to be European in appearance. I've said this before, it wouldn't make sense to have a white guy as Black Panther. It would make sense to have a white guy as Aladdin. It wouldn't make sense to cast a white guy as Bahubali, because those stories are based on certain regions of the world. And Lord of the Rings, it's the same thing. It was originally intended as a mythology for England. But anyway, folks, yeah, you see a common theme from cast members and from so-called fans. Rings of Power, it's not about Lord of the Rings. It's not. Amazon never had any intention of respecting Tolkien's work. Their intention from the get-go was to revise Tolkien's work. Their intention from the get-go was to make it woke. The showrunners working on Lord of the Rings, they don't respect Tolkien. The cast members for Rings of Power, they don't respect Tolkien. I mean, it's no wonder that a majority of people who started watching Rings of Power did not end up finishing the show. It was terribly written, they made numerous changes to the lore, And to the people working on the show, the people acting in the show, it wasn't about showing respect for Tolkien. It was all about them. It was all about them. It was all about their personal identity. It was all about their ego. And that's just one of many reasons why this show failed. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Take care until then.